Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Some Christian Guy. You can find me on Facebook on oneway/rammedia.com/rammedia, and you can find me on YouTube as well. Thank you for tuning in. Now today I'm going to be talking about, if you haven't heard, then you probably live under a rock, but if you work anywhere near a radio of any kind, if you watch the news at all, you will know that the big cathedral of Notre Dame in France is just been gutted by fire, and I want to talk today about the social implications, because I'm seeing a lot of what I would consider disturbing things, right? Because we know that the social media algorithms, depending on what you usually search, will offer you up things that are biased towards you, right? So you only ever get one point of view. Now, because I research all kinds of things, because I disagree both with the politically left and the politically right, and so on and so forth, the algorithms basically spit out towards me all views, right? And I try as best as I can to trick the algorithms into believing that I share views from both sides, so that I'll always try and get as much of the views as possible. And what I'm seeing happening is not good at all. Specifically, actually not specifically, but it ties into everything that I've always said about social engineering, and how the whole globalist movement is wanting to stoke the fires of the dialectical tensions, this false dialectical tensions between different groups of people, right? It is the globalist agenda to do that. So it brings in multiculturalism and all that kind of stuff. It brings in left and right. It brings in Christian and Muslim. It weaponizes. It works on both sides. It plays both sides for fools. And because at the end of the day, the globalist agenda is a monoculture, right? It ultimately doesn't want either Christian or Muslim. It wants everyone to be into one homogeneous soup. And everyone hail to the globalist and the globalist religion, or whatever it is that they have. We're not going to go into detail about what that globalist view actually is, but essentially what they want is a monoculture, a single global culture. And in order to achieve that, they are going to stoke the antagonisms between all the different factions in the world as much as possible. They're going to put men against women. They're going to put white against black. They're going to put Christian against Muslim, left against right, US versus Russia, etc., etc. And we all know that, we all hear about this kind of stuff all the time. Yeah, and why people haven't wisened up to this complete and utter farce is beyond me. You know, people get so caught up in it and so on and so forth. So I want to talk about the implications of this particular event, because to give you the background. So let's have a quick look-see quick just at an article from that is talking about this, right? So here we have the BBC News. It's about as big establishment as possible, etc., etc., reporting on this, and nothing wrong with that, you know, essentially speaking. Notre Dame, massive fires rage in Paris, and there you have an image and a video. I'm not going to play the video, otherwise this video is going to be too long, right? 850 old Catholic buildings, spire and roof have collapsed, but the main structure, including the two bell towers, has been saved, and so on and so forth. And it basically gives you the whole picture. How did the fire spread? Began at 6:30 at night, and quickly reached the roof of the cathedral, destroying its stained glass windows and the wooden interior before the toppling spire. And this is more or less a diagram, an aerial view here of what the site looks like. These here are the bell towers, and then this section here is what was destroyed. So in the video, if you see the video here, this bell tower, this structure here, is that structure there. So this structure was destroyed, And this all happened, basically, this cathedral is under renovation, was actually under renovation at the moment. So when you look at the footage over here, you can see all of this here. This is all scaffolding, right? Because this particular structure was already under construction, under renovations, and so on and so forth. And that was the case there. 500 firefighters, that's a hell of a lot of firefighters, let me tell you. Tried to prevent the bell towers from collapsing, and so on and so forth. They speculate on the cost. The cost is going to be obscene to restore this entire thing, let me tell you. This is not going to be a cheap thing. Historian told French broadcaster the invaluable heritage has been destroyed. Happy and unfortunate events for centuries have been marked by the bells of Notre Dame. We can only be horrified by what we see. So a lot of people expressing sympathy and so on and so forth. So in a way, the rhetoric that you see on the right, where everyone's like, oh, the established media are biased against conservative Christians and all that kind of stuff, whilst generally, yeah, okay, it's true. Not entirely, because they are showing the sympathy here. Although it says here, how have people reacted, right? It says thousands of people have gathered in the streets around the cathedral, observing the flames in silence. Some could be seen openly weeping, whilst others sang hymns or said prayers. Now this is only half true. And it says here, service churches around Paris rang their bells in response to the blaze, which happened as Catholics celebrate their Holy Week. So, as everyone knows, everyone in the West knows, this is the Holy Catholic Week, and it's approaching Easter. All right, we know that Easter is now coming this weekend. So here it says some could be seen openly weeping, whilst others sang hymns or said prayers. Now, this is where you see the bias of the BBC come up, because this is only half true. Only half true. The real story, the full picture, you have to go to both sides of the media source. So yes, some people were weeping and singing hymns and praying, but some people were laughing and mocking the Notre Dame fire. So some people were clearly rejoicing. So here we see a comment by this individual: Notre Dame cosmic karma for all the historical sites, artifacts France destroyed and stole when being colonialist scum. Typical leftist rhetoric. It's exactly what you would expect from anyone who's on the left, and so on and so. Your tolerant left, exactly pretty much what you expect here. Damien Rio, there we go. I don't speak French, so basically he's quite happy about it. And here's another one, Ahmed. So the Muslims are clearly rejoicing, and they really are rejoicing at this. They think this is absolutely great. This is cosmic justice. So you see, there's this antagonism here. People are rejoicing, some people are happy. Here is sort of a collage. Gay Godot, right? You would expect a gay person to celebrate this. This person's obviously a leftist. Most aesthetically pleasing visually, yeah, well, you can expect them to be able to spell that way, I've ever seen. Breezy universe, exactly what you would expect. While the world, I can't stop thinking about Haiti, America, Africa. Thousands of years of heart and history have been burned and destroyed by the hands of white people. I hope that bitch burned in the dust. So exactly what you would expect. You know, the Jewish worker. So the Jews are notorious leftists, right? Even the Jews themselves admit this. Adorned with anti-Semitic allusions, but no, you're right, I should weep for this devil, you know, sort of thing. So the usual thing. And another Jewish person over here: don't worry, Christians, you can manage without a temple. Exile is going to be okay. And you see people clearly, they think, you know, some Muslims, this is obviously you know, a leftist individual here, you know, bandana. I mean, you couldn't get more, you don't get much more millennial than that, right? Sort of the icon for what does a millennial look like. There you go. You've got some what appear to be sort of Middle Eastern fellas. They think this is just absolutely fantastic, right? absolutely. They think this is great, right? So here we go. Allah is grand. So Muslims laugh and they celebrate, so on and so forth. Now, and there's the article. So some people, oh, they really, oh, jihad watch these guys. They, you know, we need to watch the jihadis, right? Sampling of Facebook users taking delight in the tragedy. See if you notice anything in common. So they go, they're all obviously Muslim, you know, Muhammad this, Muhammad that, Muhammad whatever else, has some, and so Yusuf, and right. So what are we seeing? What are we seeing here, right? What are we seeing? And here's the aftermath. So the scaffolding for the most part is still intact because scaffolding is made of steel. It's not going to burn as easily as some of the rest of the structures. There's some of the aftermath. So most of it is still intact. But clearly this is some of the stuff that was managed to be spared. There's you know, some photos, you know, I mean, this is going to cost, man. I wouldn't want to get I wouldn't want to get the bill for that, man, let me tell you. Right, so that's before and after shot, right? It's all quite a devastating thing. Now, what do we make of this? Now, this is where we have to. So I showed you evidence that the people on the left clearly think this is wonderful. They think this is great, and so on and so forth. Now, here's what we must understand. At the moment, we have no idea how or why this happened. No clue. No clue. It is far too early to speculate. However, the other disturbing thing is the people on the right. So the people on the left are clearly rejoicing and think this is absolutely great. So the people on the left are showing their true colors. They're clearly a bunch of bottom, whoever is smiling and laughing at this particular incident, laughing at the misery of others, is clearly bottom of the barrel, scum, pathetic loser, as that's just the way it is. If you're laughing at other people's misery, and so on and so forth, at this kind of a loss, you're clearly bottom of the barrel scum, end of story. And you've got the typical leftist, the leftist libtard type of rhetoric going on. But now you have the morons on the other side as well, the people on the right, without any evidence whatsoever. It's too early to tell. You have people left, right, and center immediately blaming the Muslims. As you saw, I showed you there, this must have been a Muslim conspiracy. It must have been, and they're already blaming multiculturalism. And so all of the people all on the right are already going on about this is the Muslims, this is the multiculturalism, close the borders. Exactly what you would expect. Exactly what it's like. You can predict. It is so predictable. And even friends of mine, and I challenged them on this. They started, you know, the Facebook goes, all the social media goes, and I said, listen, guy, you know, hold your horses. We don't know yet what's responsible, right? So, and this is the thing, right? The people on the people on both the left and the right always get up in arms when the media jumps the gun and starts making assumptions. Everyone, yet both idiots on the right are perfectly willing to go ahead and do it when it suits them, when it suits their narrative, right? So all of this professed objectivity goes completely out the bloody window, right? Whenever it suits, whether it's on the left or on the right. And this is why this whole ideology is just, we should abandon it altogether. And so we see these guys already wanting to blame, must have been some Muslim, and people already saying, oh, this brings back memories of 9/11 and so on and so forth. All right. So what are we to make of this? For anyone who's sane, anyone who wants to sit back and try to analyze this whole thing as rationally as possible, right? Here's the first thing to consider, right? Now, from my own personal experience, I'm an engineer. I live in the UK. I live within the EU code of health and safety, right? Now, as an engineer myself, right, I deal with companies. I visit the sites of places like BAE, British Aerospace Engineering, and Rolls-Royce, and many other sites like that, where I sometimes have to visit to do work. And in order for the company I work for to do business with them, we are obliged Otherwise, they refuse to do business with us. We are obliged to implement within our own firm, and all these kinds of to get all. I've recently just gone through health and safety, various health and safety trainings, and all of these kinds of things. The EU health and safety code architecture is second to none in the entire world, right? It is, in fact, it is so rigid and so stringent and so sometimes ridiculous that the health and safety sometimes actually gets in the way of the work that needs to be done, right? So a job that should take half an hour can take an entire day because health and safety is so ridiculous. So why am I saying this? The chances that this was an accident is almost zero. Right? So the official story says that this was an accident, right? That this was, let me tell you something, right? If in order for me to go to a site, let's say like British Aerospace, they do background checks. They are so anal about who they let onto their site that it is unbelievable. It is unbelievable the hoops that you need to jump through in order to be able to visit a secure site and have health and safety. And sometimes, I mean, just to go to do a simple job, I've got to sit through an induction and watch health and safety. It's obscene, right? You have to do a risk assessment. If I want to so much as fart in a different direction, I have to do a risk assessment on the potential health risk of farting in this direction instead of, and what kind of PPE and precautions. And it's like they actually train you to be as absolutely paranoid as possible, right? You need to understand, right? So if you do not live in the EU, right? And I believe that the US is also quite ridiculous when it comes to this sort of thing, right? If you don't live in the EU, you cannot possibly even begin to comprehend the insanity that health and safety, the paranoia that health and safety is, right? Now, obviously, accidents still can happen, all right? So it is theoretically possible. But let me tell you something. For something like the Notre Dame, I'm almost willing to guarantee that this was not an accident. Okay, that I'm almost willing to get, because here's the thing, right? Part of health and safety, if you're going to engage in any hot work, so hot work includes anything that produces any heat whatsoever, right? A spark. So if I'm gonna do any grinding, even with just a regular sanding disc, right? The sanding disc produces sparks. That's considered hot work, right? There needs to be, so that is a fire risk, right? If there's welding, ironworks, anything that produces that kind of heat, they even will have people who will stand there on site, people who are almost like a marshal, where they will stand there and babysit the site even after the work is finished for up to 3 hours after the work has been finished, to make sure that no fire has been kindled, to really make sure that you understand what I'm saying. So for even if a fire had started, right, for whatever reason, been kindled for whatever reason possible, it would have been discovered if all of the health and safety protocols and everything were in place. And believe you me, the liability that the company doing the work would have been under, because they would have had to have insurance. So you cannot go and do this job at the Notre Dame without insurance. You would have had to have an insurance policy that covered you for hundreds of millions, right? Because that's what it's going to cost to so the liability is obscene, all right? The liability is obscene. So the idea that this was just some freak accident, I don't buy it, okay? I don't buy it at all. So by implication, I'm then saying it was done on purpose, right? That this was done on purpose. Now, if it was done on purpose, why? Well, for those of you who watch my channel at all, who follow any alternative media, not just me, but anyone else, you will know that there is a globalist agenda, that there's a social engineering agenda, and so on and so on, that's constantly going on. And when major sites get targeted that these things are not happening by accident. When a major site like this goes down in flames, right? This now this comes not long after the incident in New Zealand, where matey went into a mosque and went shot up a mosque. And ever since that happened, a whole bunch of churches in France actually have been attacked and vandalized and so on and so forth, right? Some of them, some of the perpetrators were Muslim, some of them are leftists, that, you know, your Antifa types, and so on and so forth. So if you want to blame someone, you literally have an entire roster of potential people that it could have been. It could have been Muslims, it could have been immigrants, it could have been leftists, it could have been radical atheists, it could have been almost anyone, right? So for people to start jumping up and down and saying it was definitely one group or another is not only ridiculous, but it is a predictable outcome. So if you do this on purpose, you know immediately that it's going to cause tension between the two factions, right? One faction is going to rejoice about this. The leftists are going to think this is absolutely wonderful. This is going to tick off the people on the right, who are going to get all up in arms about it, and are going to start, and they're going to rally and go after the leftists, and then the leftists are going to entrench, and they're going to go, and the whole stupid thing then completely spirals out of control. Which is precisely what they want, right? It is precisely what the globalist agenda wants to do. It's the thesis, it's the antithesis, it's the Hegelian dialectic, the social engineering. You get the people to antagonize each other, to rub each other up, to completely piss each other off. You have civil war, you have cultural war, you have, because that's what we're in at the moment, whether you want to believe it or not. Not all wars are necessarily all at gunpoint, okay? And then you have extremism, and then you've got all this talk about extremism and extremism this and extremism that. We need to do away with extremism, and the whole rhetoric over extremism and over the people on the far left and all the people on the far right means that you have a ripe political landscape within which to bring about legislation which will continually homogenize the different groups of people. Because at the end of the day, if you look earlier on, consider what I said, where the globalist agenda is a technocratic monoculture. Technocratic monoculture. They want to blur the divisions between the ethnos, between the different ethnic groups. They want to blur and completely eliminate the distinctions between genders, between absolutely everything, right? So that everyone thinks the same, does the same, and so on and so forth. This is that new world order sort of mentality, the globalist sort of one world government type of thing. This is precisely where it's headed, and every single person that completely jumps on whatever bandwagon that it is just allowing that. Now here's the other thing that we need to consider, right? The globalist machination has very successfully implanted a victim mentality into various groups of people. So it has successfully implanted a victim mentality into the minds of Muslims, into the minds of women, into the minds of blacks, into the minds of transsexuals, into the minds of homosexuals, and so every single category in Latinos as well. So my people, Brazilians, Peruvians, Colombians, Mexicans, the whole South American family, right? Very, very successfully have jumped on this victim mentality bandwagon. Oh, the whites are out to get right, sort of thing. They're all very, very successfully. Now, who is the last group that needs to be fully convinced of its own victim status? It's whites. It's Christians. It's Christians and white people in general, right? The attacks on the churches, the attack on Christian culture, the attack on Western everything. Whites are beginning to show signs of this victim mentality as well, right? And here's the thing. all of these groups, right, whether it's the blacks, whether it's the transsexuals, whether it's the whites, whether it doesn't matter who it is, they all have, every single one of them have perfectly legitimate reasons to feel harassed. They really do, every single one of them, to feel a little bit harassed because, oh, these people rejected me and those people think I'm terrible and the whole world is out to get me, right? That's what they want. Okay, so now you've got Christians running around, and this is not to say that racism doesn't exist, that anti-Semitism doesn't exist, that Christians are not persecuted. This is the problem. Every single one of these categories of people are actually being harassed and persecuted in some way somewhere in the world. They are. So there is such thing as persecution of Christians. There is such thing as persecution of whites. There is such thing as persecution of Latinos, harassment of Latinos, persecution of blacks, harassment of blacks. Gay people are harassed. They're obviously harassed because some people clearly just don't like. If you're gay, then they hate you and. Like your Southern Baptists, they go and I'm not saying I agree with homosexuality or that I agree with transgender. I don't have to agree with these things, but I can still treat the person decently. You know what I'm saying? I can I don't have to go to the side of the road and picket and tell them constantly that they're all going to go to hell, right? It doesn't mean I can't be friends with gay people, and in fact I am. You understand? It doesn't mean that I must now go and burn them on the stake. Right? But this is actually, but a lot of your bottom of the barrel people, they will go out and do that. That is precisely what. So when you actually sit back, you realize that everyone is harassing everyone else. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a category of person who is not harassed in some way, shape, or form. If you're a Muslim, you're harassed. If you're a Christian, you're harassed. If you're white, you're harassed. If you're a woman, you're harassed. If you're a man, you're harassed. Okay? Doesn't matter. So every single one of these people, and let me make an analogy. Imagine a marriage, right? You have husband and wife, right? And the marriage falls apart. This one is blaming that one, right? The husband blames the wife is this, the wife is that, and the next thing, right? The wife blames the husband. Oh, the husband is this and that, and the next thing, right? But if you actually sit back and analyze the relationship, you see that both of them are morons. Right? Both are right and both are wrong. Both have their good points, both have their bad points, both are innocent and both are guilty. But the problem is they can't get over themselves for 5 minutes long enough in order to repair the marriage and get along. Right? So the solution, right? And this is where you get that thesis, antithesis, right? So the solution that is being proposed, right, is, so there's two solutions. Now in the marriage you can either get divorced, right? You can either get divorced and separate, and you go live over there and you go live over there. But there's another solution, right? Remove all distinctions, become exactly the same as each other, and then you won't fight. Because if you remove all the differences, if you remove all the distinctions, then you will no longer fight. And that is the globalist solution. The globalist solution is homogenize, keep everyone together, right? Keep everyone together. Homogenize them, so remove all of the differences, right? And once those differences are discarded, all the differences, so there's no longer black or white or this or this or that. And here's the thing, right? When you have the mixture, the mixing of the races is actually for that, right? If you mix enough black people and white people and Latino people and Chinese people, eventually, like, you get like what you have in Brazil, right? In Brazil, we're literally all related to each other, right? So if you take me, for example, I apparently look Caucasian, right? But if you look into my family tree, I've got African, I've got Indian, I've got everything, right? I am a pavement special deluxe, right? I am mongrel exhibit A, right? I've got everything in my family tree. I've got everything almost, right? If I had to do one of those DNA test things, it would say you come from everywhere, right? I've got a little bit of everything, okay? And as a result, right? As a result, with all of this intermixturing and intermingling and stuff like that, you naturally have an identity crisis, right? I have an identity crisis. Am I this or am I that? And that's what you're seeing, right? Am I this or am I that or am I the next thing? And you have people trying to develop new identities and new kinds of things and all that, because the whole shebang is literally burning, right? Like Notre Dame. The whole Notre Dame burning is really apt. What an analogy for the times we live in the West, man. Let me tell you, right? It's beautiful. Okay, and here's the thing: there is definitely secret cabal behind this, because it's just too perfect. It's just too perfect. It's just too well timed. It's just too beautiful, right? It's just too beautiful, right? The way everything is happening in social media, it's just too perfect. It's absolutely perfect. The narrative is just chugging along beautifully, right? And everyone's playing the role. And let me tell you something. We're going to have one world government. We already have one world government. We just don't realize it yet. But we're going to have this monoculture before we know it. It's coming. Let me tell you, because people don't see this. People don't see this at all. Right? It's coming. Remove the distinctions between man and woman, black and white, this and that. And here's the thing: distinctions are not necessarily bad. Distinctions are in fact a good thing. Now, as a Christian, right? If you're a Christian and you don't get involved in this political stupidity, right? This rhetoric, this left-right garbage, right? And you're a Christian and you stand back, you realize who was the one that created differences in the first place? God created differences, because God likes variety. Variety is good. But human beings, in our narrow-minded stupidity, we want to fight over every aspect of difference there is, right? A white man wants to say this and that about a black man, and a black man wants to say this and that about a white man. A woman wants to say this about man, and so vice versa. Rather than actually say you're different and that's brilliant. What can you bring to the table to make my life more in-depth, sort of thing. If you look out in nature, right, Christians, one of the Christians' ethics is that nature is an exposition. We can infer what God is like. You've got all kinds of variety. You don't have one type of animal and one type of plant and one type of this and one type of that. There is nothing wrong with variety. What is wrong is when that variety becomes a point of contention, which it does, because human beings are retarded, right? We like to think that whatever unique thing that I have is special and must be set over and above everyone else, right? And that's just one of those things, right? And if someone else actually happens to be better than me, so for example, let's say I've got a low IQ, right? I'm an average Joe, and I see someone with a high IQ. Rather than be happy for the fact that that person has a high IQ, and that person can actually teach me something, rather than me appreciating that this person has something I do not, instead I prefer to tear them down. It's a narcissistic rage. It's a narcissistic injury. Oh, I cannot possibly be less than someone else, so let me tear it down, right? And the problem is that there's two narcissists, right? There's the low IQ narcissist and there's the high IQ narcissist. So the low IQ narcissist will want to tear down because the high IQ guy has something he doesn't. So the low IQ narcissist will want to tear down, and the high IQ will want to poo-poo that rather than learn and uplift himself, right? And the high IQ narcissist will think that he's the supreme leader of the world, right? And will want to, suppress and eliminate the guy with the low IQ because he believes the guy with the low IQ is worthless and all that kind of stuff. And the high IQ narcissist has a overinflated sense of self-worth, because in his bias he thinks that a high IQ is the only way to go. It's the root of all truth, right? Which is typical in this very rationalistic type of world that we have, especially in this West, this cult of rationalism and all that kind of, where everyone's like, oh, if intelligence and rationality and so on and so forth. It's like, if you don't have wisdom, then that stuff counts for nothing. And so, man, If you are a Christian, you should know better. And if you are not a Christian, if you're an atheist, if you are a Muslim, or if you are trans, I don't care what you are. You need to catch a wake up, and you need to see what's going on. You really, really need to see what's going on. Because all of this jumping around is leading to that dystopian future, that monoculture, that technocratic 1984 future. That's where it's going. Where everyone in the world is controlled and dominated and ruled by a few elite people. The elite people love this nonsense. They absolutely love this rubbish. They're watching all of you carry on like a bunch of retards, doing exactly what they knew you would do. Each and every single one of you jumping your own little bandwagon and pointing fingers at everyone else. What does the Christian ethic teach? The Christian ethic teaches humility. Be humble. Even if you have something that someone else does not have, you should still be humble, because A, whatever you have is not really yours. You did nothing to earn it. It's an accident of birth, right? And that person over there probably has something you don't, that you might benefit from. And God created the ethnos. This idea that we should eliminate differences between the races of men. So you have this idiotic thing that there's no such thing as race. There's only one race, and it's the human. It's garbage. There is such thing as different races, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing, right? God created it, right? At Babel. Confused the languages, separated everyone. Everyone sort of in their little groups went off and established their own communities, their own cultures, their own way of life, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Yes, as a Christian, we want everyone, no matter the culture, to come into a personal relationship with Jesus, with God, and all that kind of stuff. But that does not come by sacrificing your ethnic identity. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. There's no need, there's no reason to sacrifice your culture, so long as the peculiarities of your culture are tempered, ameliorated by objective truth, right? Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So he says, there's a couple of things you have to do. Don't kill, don't murder, don't commit adultery, etc., etc., etc. Otherwise, for the most part, we really, really are free to express ourselves in whatever unique ways we wish to do so, as long as those things do not contradict ultimate truth. Objective truth does not commit the law, contradict the law of God, and so on and so forth. Which is why the Christian church can exist in Africa, can exist in Europe, can exist in South America. And if you go to any one of these churches, you'll see that they all have similarities, right? They all have the same confessions of faith and stuff like that. But the way they do certain things, the type of food they eat, and so on and so forth, the way they do services, have slight differences to them, and that's fine. That's fine. And if you don't like the way one does something, well, then move and go to the other one. There's no reason why you have to force that one over there to conform to your way of being. There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that, right? But people get it. Even within my own denomination, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, you get Europeans poo-poo the way Africans do church, in the way they do church in Africa, and the Africans do the same thing to the Europeans, and it's like, and it's nonsense. So you guys, as long as you've got the truth, right? As long as you've got the truth, the Orthodox faith, what primitive Christianity taught, what the Bible teaches, all of the rest of the cultural peculiarities don't matter. They don't matter. And this infighting, this inbickering, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Right? And what people don't realize is that by forcing everyone together, right? And this is almost like a law of physics, right? When things come under pressure, you produce heat. And when you produce a lot of heat, any any sort of edge, the materials eventually excite to the point where you have extreme heat and they meld and they fuse together, right? It's part of welding. For example, you can actually weld. There is a process. Let me see if I can find a video of it on YouTube, because this will, oops. So let me show you here. Let me just mute that. I'm just going to show you the video. So basically this thing is spinning at very, very high speed, right? Let's go back. Inertia welding, right? So basically what you will have is two materials. So this one is spinning at a very, very high speed, and this is forced into the other one, right? So you've got tremendous friction going on there. The material melts. So see, there's a lathe, right? And they show you how they do it. So pop the material in there. It's actually very interesting. And this is sometimes how welding happens, right? Join the two, get it going. You want a fairly high rep. Start pushing it together. Boom, there we go. Okay. Heat, melt. Eventually the materials are now welded together. They now fuse. Now the two become one, right? So that so that is how you fuse things, right? You force. So a lot of people wonder, it's like, why are they if different groups of people don't get along, why is it that the political establishment is literally forcing people to get together, right? Whether they like it or not. So it's it's like your mom when you're a kid, right? You're gonna play nicely with it and you're gonna like it. So rather than see, right, these kids clearly don't get along, right? So, you know, separate them, let that group play over there and that group play. No. You guys are you're gonna get together and you're gonna play with each other and you're gonna love it. Right? Or if your mother cooks something you don't particularly like, it's like you're gonna eat it and you're gonna like it. Whether you like, you've got no choice, right? And this is literally what they're doing, right? Is you get these different groups of people who have different ethics, have different worldviews, have different all kinds of things, and you force them against their will, force them against each other until you create a hell of a fire where everything literally melts and disintegrates until everything becomes one. So you have the occult, Freemasonic. How many of you know of the Freemasons, right? Out of many, one, right? We know this. Out of many, one. Now the thing is, it is not necessarily a bad thing so in Christianity we all become like the body of Christ, right? But we don't sacrifice our individual identities. So within Christianity there's no dialectic between the many and the one, right? There's a harmony between the group. So you've got the group and you have the individual, and there's no dialectical tension between the two, right? The individual does not disappear into the group so that so that the individual becomes the completely disintegrated into the group, so that the group is paramount. That's not what happens. But then also the group is not subservient to the individual either, right? You have a balance between the two, and we see this in the Christian concept of marriage, where the man and the woman come together, but their individual identity, and they become one, but their individual identities are never meant to be subsumed one to the other. They retain their individual identities, right? And they're complementary and work together. But in the occult, there is always a dialectical tension between the one and the many, right? For example, you see in a lot of the pagan rituals and all that kind of stuff, and philosophies, you have people wanting the division. They say that division, right? This is Gnosticism, essentially. They say that division, the problem is the division, right? So everything needs to come back into the oneness, so you cease to exist and you go back into the oneness. Do you hear about that a lot, by any chance? Right? You hear that all over the place. It's common to Hinduism, it's common to Buddhism. It's all the pagan religions believe in this cosmic oneness, right? Even if you watch like Star Wars, for example, it talks about the Force, and the Force permeates through everyone, and when you die, you disseminate back into the Force, right? So there's no distinction between you, the individual, and you, the grand overall force, sort of thing, the oneness of nature and all that kind of stuff. That they teach that the distinctions are false, and the true path to enlightenment, whatever, is when you demolish all distinctions, right? So they have a dialectic between the one and the many. So the individual needs to be sacrificed to the group. This is Gnosticism, and you see this in heretical Christianity as well. So heretical Christianity teaches, for example, the doctrine of absolute divine simplicity. That means that there is no division between God's essence and God's energies, that God's essence and his energies are exactly the same thing, that basically God's justice is identical to God's wrath, is identical to God's creation, there's no real distinction. These things are all identical. Now here's the thing: if there's no distinction between God's essence and his energies, and if we as created creatures are God's energies, if there's no difference between the two, then we are God as well. We are all this cosmic oneness. And Catholicism teaches that, by the way. And this is why in some Christian sects, so this is definitely in Catholic, a lot of people don't realize it, but Catholicism, the Western Church, teaches absolute divine simplicity. That's what they teach. Augustine taught it, Aquinas taught it, and so on and so forth. That's what they teach. And they get this from the Hellenistic, the Greek philosophies, Aristotle, Plato, right? The Platonists. That's what these guys teach. It's common to all of the pagan world religions, right? Where there is this false dialectic between the one and the many, and ultimately the one needs to be sacrificed and disintegrated into the great grand oneness, right? The great grand group. And this is a false dialectic, because in Christianity, the individual as well as the group both are preserved, both are complementary, right? There's no dialectical, and in Christianity we avoid dialectics, right? There is no problem with the individual and with the group. They are both complementary. The one should never subsume the other, because if the individual, if the group is subsumed to the individual, you have a tyrannity, or a tyrannity. You have a tyranny, right? You have a tyranny. But then on the other hand, if the individual is subsumed by the group, you have another kind of tyranny. So basically, you have the tyranny of a dictator, or you have the tyranny of like a communism. There are two different types of tyranny, right? And by the way, capitalism is the same thing, right? The individuals, so you have the individual's own drive, and the community is subsumed under the will of the capitalist individual who only thinks about himself and achieving his own financial ends and so on and so forth. And in that way, everything, all other priorities need to be subsumed under the attainment, the personal interest of the individual, right? So that's why you have in the West generally, so this individualism is the paramount thing. The individual is the one. So doctrines like that are spread by most libertarians, in all honesty, people like Jordan Peterson, who's become very, very popular of late. Oh, everything is about the individual, the individual, right? right? And it's only half true, right? So on the left they're all about the group, and on the right they're all about the individual. It's like that's a false dilemma. It's a false dialectic. There needs to be a harmony between the two. But they have these two factions rub up against each other, and eventually you're going to end up with a globalist monoculture, right? That's what you're going to end up with, a globalist monoculture. And this is what Christians talking about when they're talking about Antichrist, when they're talking about the beast system. They're talking about a global superpower that is going to subsume everyone in a kind of tyranny. That is exactly what they're talking about. This is what Christians have been told. The only problem is these days most Christians know nothing about their own religion, and so they fall into the traps of all of this pathetic political garbage. That's what they do, right? So, hey man, people, you need to catch a wake up. If you honestly think that you are going to defeat the globalists by playing their dialectical game, you've got another thing coming. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this helped you out. I hope you appreciated my ruminations on this subject. You know, this is my humble opinion, right? This is my humble opinion, my humble observations. You know, I offer it to you. You do with it what you want. So that said, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for watching. Take it easy. And cheerio, God bless, until next time. Thank you very much. Bye.